Hey there. Welcome to the Adoption Roadmap podcast, where we talk about navigating the adoption process and beyond. Before we get into the episode, here's a quick word from today's sponsor. The choice to place a child for adoption is one of the most profound and difficult decisions a woman can make. Many birth mothers describe feeling supported during the process, but unseen afterward. Solace Gift Boxes were created to change that. Each box honors birth mothers in their ongoing motherhood with beautifully curated artisan-made items from small businesses. Choose from 3 themes: Peace, Love, and Pamper, the Paper Crane, and the Light Box. Available in 3 sizes, all $59.99 or less, with shipping included. Don't know a birth mom personally? You can sponsor a box and Solace will send it to a birth mother nominated through their community. Solace is a project by Absolute Love Adoption, a licensed 501c3. Learn more or send a box at adoptsolace.com. Link in the show notes to learn more.
Today on the Adoption Roadmap podcast, I'm talking to Tony Hynes, whose life story flips nearly every adoption stereotype on its head. Adopted by 2 white moms as a young Black boy in the 90s, Tony grew up navigating racial identity, LGBTQ dynamics, and a complex custody battle that lasted over a decade. He spent his childhood as the bridge between 2 families, neither fully claimed nor fully free. Tony is now a powerful voice reshaping adoption through his memoir, The Son with 2 Moms, and his work at the Center for Adoption Support and Education. But behind the advocacy and expertise are big questions. What did his moms get right and wrong? How does Tony truly feel about adoption today? Adoptive parents, listen closely, because what Tony shares today could just change the way you parent your child. Welcome, Tony. Thank you so much for being here. I want to start by going back to your earliest years in adoption, or even before that. Your earliest years involved separations from your birth mom, your grandmother, and also some stays in orphanages, which we don't even hear that word too much today. Tell us a little bit of your story.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for having me here today. And yes, I love that you said tell us a little bit about your story
Yes.
because it's so hard, right, to encapsulate everything that is involved and has gone on, whether we're adoptees or not in our stories, and
Yeah.
especially for adopted persons. But I'll take you through a bit of mine. So, as you mentioned, I did spend time in an orphanage. That time in an orphanage for me was really set up by the fact that my birth mom happens to be schizophrenic, and she was not able to care for myself or my sister. And so while she did raise my older sister, who's 9 years older than me, for a little while, much like my sister, she placed me at first with a fictive kin relationship, someone who was a friend of the family, a grandmother figure. And I spent the first year of my life growing up with her. My sister spent the majority of her life through high school growing up with the person we called our grandmother. During this time, I was also kind of in and out sometimes of my mother's home, but also an orphanage. What was happening was that on days where it was really difficult to care for me, my mom would take me to the orphanage. And I have to say I'm told because, again, as adoptees, we have to go off what we're told about our stories as children are, right? I'm told that one of the times she took me to the orphanage, it was a weekend. And at the end of this weekend, she was coming to pick me up from the orphanage. And someone there said, hey, you can either leave Tony here or you can take him home, but you can't keep doing this back and forth. So it was at that particular time when I was around 1 years old that she decided, okay, well, he's going to remain in the orphanage with, I think, the thought in mind that I will be back to take him and raise him separately, permanently outside of the orphanage.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that obviously did not happen in my story. I stayed in the orphanage for about 2.5 years till I was 3.5. And then I was matched with my two moms, Mary and Janet, who were at the time my foster parents. And so that's really where the story starts. And I started to go live with Mary and Janet as my foster family when I was about 4 years old.
Okay. Wow. Interesting because, yeah, I was going to ask, how do you, if in, for an orphanage, the dropping off and picking up, that sounds more like a daycare. And that's probably what they were getting at too. um, so did she ever come in to see you during those 2.5 years that you know of?
Not that I know of, no,
Okay.
not that I know of.
So, what do you think that those early experiences have taught you about attachment, trust, and also the concept of home?
Well, I think that one thing that comes to mind with regard to attachment and trust in the concept of home is that you don't really know what home is as far as this kind of physical location space. I think we do.
Hmm.
It's usually attached to this feeling that we get in our bones and our souls about what feels like home to
Yeah.
us. And
Yeah.
so in my life, even in those early stages of it, I didn't have a place that I was consistently calling my home. I
Mm.
was with my mom. I was with the person I was calling my grandmom. I was in the orphanage. I was with Mary and Janet. And so I didn't really know, I think, during those early stages, what kind of adult figures I could really feel attached to. Nor did I feel a sense of, we talk so much about this concept of permanency. I definitely didn't feel a sense of permanency in any particular environment that I was in. I
Yeah.
didn't feel that I was safe, meaning I didn't feel my body was safe from being moved from one space to another. And I speak to that 4 or 5 year old Tony, not necessarily that 2 or 3 year old Tony, which I don't have. I have bodily memories of, but not
Yeah.
a other memories of. So I think that these attachment and these disrupted attachments really, of course, impact children, even in those early stages.
Yeah, and we'll dig into that more. I want to back up for a second because I think this is going to be really important for hopeful adoptive parents to hear who are on their journey. You said your birth mom has schizophrenia. Do you or your siblings also suffer with any severe mental health issues like a schizophrenia or a bipolar or any of the major mental health issues?
I think that's a great question. And one of the things that I like to talk to when it comes to adoptive parents, first and foremost, is disclosing information.
Hmm.
Because a lot of adoptive parents might feel that, well, and I actually had this happen a few months ago. Well, I know that my adoptive parents' mother has schizophrenia, but I'm afraid to tell them because I'm afraid of how they'll take it and that they might be afraid that they will get schizophrenia themselves. And so I don't want to put that burden on them. And so therefore, I'm not going to share that piece of information with them. And then I've had other families who know about bipolar disorders and things like that, but also are fearful of disclosure. And so what I tell families is it's really important to be open and honest and to share as much information that you know about birth family as possible. With that said, in my life, my sister does not suffer from schizophrenia. Depression is pretty consistent with the type of schizophrenia my birth mother does have, and
Mm.
so that is present. I was diagnosed with depression. There are members of my biological family who also have depression, but no severe types of mental illnesses in terms of the schizophrenia side of things. Not saying depression is not severe,
Yeah,
and
and
yeah,
I couldn't figure out a different word. I'm sure there is a word to describe. I think you know what I was talking about, and I don't want to downplay depression because
sorry.
it can be severe. Thank you for sharing that. I also that's interesting because I didn't expect you to go there, the sharing part, but yes, I think age appropriately everything must be shared, and there's nothing that, an adoptee can't handle about the truth, right? The truth is so important. Where I was going is this worry that, oh, I can't present to a situation where mom has schizophrenia because that's a huge indication that my child may have schizophrenia. And I don't know what the stats are. That may be true. You might have gotten lucky. I don't know. I just wanted to put that out there.
No, I think that's a great point. And to parents who are feeling that, well, I'm not sure if I should adopt if my child's mother has schizophrenia,
Right.
my suggestion to them would be not to adopt that child, to be honest, because if they have, if they feel that way, then they might be carrying that with them, even knowing the statistics.
Yeah.
So, in my case, especially with schizophrenia, because schizophrenia is complex, meaning that it doesn't typically present until someone is in their late teens, early and mid 20s. So, you can go through the first 16 years of your life,
Interesting.
and then it can present when you're 19, 20, 25 years old, is typically when it's presenting. So parents, therefore, might be thinking things are going well, but is this other shoe going to drop here? Schizophrenia isn't one of those things that you're definitely going to have if your parent has it.
Mm-hmm.
You are more likely than the general population, but it's still pretty unlikely that you will develop it yourself. However, if a parent were to feel that way, I would say to them,
Yeah.
the same thing is true of other health concerns. You
Mm-hmm.
have to really think as a parent, okay, what do you feel like you can be prepared for to work on? I don't want to say to handle, but to work on with your child, to work on with sometimes mental health care providers, to work on with doctors, because there are going to be situations where you're not going to just have this quote ready made quote perfect child that you're thinking
Right.
about. You really need to be able to adjust your expectations. And your child might not have schizophrenia, but maybe they develop bipolar disorder. So maybe a parent said, hey, I didn't want this child that might develop schizophrenia. And the child ends up developing bipolar disorder. And they say, oh, man, I thought that we escaped this because I chose a child that I thought was, quote, less risk in this way. And now I have to navigate through this particular challenge. So it's always about kind of allowing ourselves, yes, to have some expectations, but also allowing our minds to go in the direction of, I really might have to adjust these expectations.
Yeah. I love that work on. That's a great way to say it. So by age 5, and this is when you said some of your memories are starting to come in. Mary and Janet adopted you, but 3 months later the adoption was overturned. Why?
It's a great question, right? So everything was going fine. The adoption had happened. I was 5 years old. I was in an interracial adopted family type in a same sex headed household family type. And then, as you said, 3 months later, the adoption is overturned, we're told. And it was overturned by a panel of 3 judges who had decided that a white same sex headed household wasn't the right household to raise a black child in. So, on that basis, they had overturned that adoption, which meant that I was no longer adopted, I was no longer an adoptee, and that a custody battle was going to happen. The result of the custody battle could have been that I was going to live with my fictive kin there, my grandmother, and her family for the foreseeable future, and that Mary and Janet would lose all custody rights in that custody battle. So that was what was going on. But they felt that these 2 white women wouldn't be prepared to give a home to not only a child in need, but a child of color, specifically a black child in need. And yes, that because they were a same sex lesbian couple, how could they raise a man or the type of man perhaps that societally would be accepted, and would their family be ostracized, discriminated against? It's too hard. So they, along with actually my own social worker in the case, were the ones who were really responsible for helping overturn that decision. I say my own social worker because my social worker in the case, we found out, was working against our quote side and feeding information to my birth family about, okay, this is how you appeal. You can't allow him to be adopted by this couple because if you are allowing it, then he won't know what it means to be black. He won't know what it means to be a man. So you need to step in and do this, and I'm going to help you do that. So that's what happened in my case for that part.
Wow. And it also goes back to are your moms capable to work on it, right? Not to handle it, but they had made the decision, we are capable of working on this dynamic here. So then where do you go to live
And
at
during
this?
that time, I was thankfully still allowed to live with Mary and Janet. So my day to day life didn't change. They still
Okay.
picked me up from school Monday through Friday, and I was with them on the weekends. But we were kind of just in this standstill and place of walking on eggshells about what was going to happen next with this particular custody arrangement.
And did you know what was going on? Did they tell you what was happening?
I did. I did know what was going on. And in my book, I actually have one chapter that's called Five Words. I was on a class field trip in kindergarten, and this was in the wilderness, and I was playing with my friends, and I was just playing, and I don't remember what I was doing, but I remember all of a sudden hearing this loud shrieking noise, and it was like a wailing almost of a shriek. And I just instinctively ran to the sound of it without knowing exactly what it was. And as I got closer and closer, I heard the sound of my mother Mary's voice, and she kept saying the same words over and over again. They're going to take Tony. They're going to take Tony.
Wow.
And instantly, I knew exactly what that meant without her having to verbalize it more than that. I ended up going home with parents of some friends of mine that day. And then when I got home, what was going on and what had happened was explained to me. It was explained that the adoption had been overturned, that we were going to appeal this as a family. We were going to see what was going to happen next.
What goes through the mind of a 5-year-old boy when you learn that you are becoming unadopted? And what does that do to your sense of belonging?
Right. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
fear, right? Because the fear is that this place that I've called home, the only place that I've known as home in my body so far in my life that I have this working memory of, is going to be ripped away from me. And my family is going to be different. My family is going to change. The people that tuck me in at night are going to be different people that tuck me in at night. The people that were taking me to school are going to be different people. The people that I'm eating with are all going to be different, and I'm going to lose Mary and Janet, the people that I now love, the people that I call my moms. So this was a very difficult thing for me to hear as a 5 year old, and I do have this very concrete memory of that particular time in my life.
Do you does your personality change with them? Do you start putting up walls?
I don't know. I think that's a great question. I think that because I was so young, I don't have kind of this comparison of this is my personality before,
Yeah.
this is my comparison, my personality after. And I think what ended up happening in the custody battle that did influence how I was going to feel moving forward. Because if it had gone a different way, the custody battle, the result of it, I think that we might be having a different conversation about my personality and did it change? How much did it change if it had? Fortunately, the custody battle, the decision was ultimately made that I was going to stay with Mary and Janet, but that they were not going to have sole custody of me, that my birth family, they were going to have joint custody of me, but I would still grow up with Mary and Janet. So, still technically, I was not an adoptee anymore. I was in DC, where I was adopted from, what was called a ward of the state. And I wasn't adopted formally again until I was 19 years old. So I lived the life of this interracial adoptee without technically actually being adopted.
Wow. That's a lot. So your birth family decided to fight. Um, and you are caught in this tug of war between both of them. What do you wish now, looking back, that both of your families would have known or done differently to help you ease that emotional burden on you?
I think that's a great question too. I think that when it comes to my birth family, what I would have liked is to have made to feel less like I had to choose between my two families, because my grandmother that I mentioned, she was very open and honest about how she felt about me being raised by Mary and Janet initially. She didn't like it. She didn't want me to be raised by lesbian women, white people. And she said after the custody battle that, they stole you from us. They probably don't allow you to have any black friends. She asked me to choose between my birth mother and Mary and Janet, who I would prefer to live with, while my birth mom was sitting in front of me. So difficult things and these dueling loyalties that a lot of adoptees feel were definitely coming up for me. So I would have loved if the kind of situation would have been approached with a bit more empathy with regard to how I might have been feeling with regard to that choice. And then when it comes to my adopted family, I would have liked if I had gotten to see them interact more with my birth family, not only at that time, but also growing up. I would have loved for them to not just drop me off necessarily, but spend a bit more time with my birth relatives. I knew that the families didn't like each other very much at that particular point in time, but that's something that the child is aware of
Yeah.
and that's why I say to adoptive parents, be careful about how you're speaking about birth family, even if they have done things that you're unhappy with or that you think are wrong. Your child is not only a member of your family, but a member of their family too. And when they hear you saying negative things, or when they hear you kind of disassociating yourself a bit, they're going to wonder in their bodies what they should do. Should they follow your lead? Should they be loyal to their birth family?
Yeah.
How do they navigate that? And it's unlikely that they are going to talk to you about how they're actually feeling about that, because they haven't been given the space to do that. So that was definitely the case in my situation. So I wish
Mm.
that those two pieces I wish were a bit stronger. And of course, I wish that my white adoptive parents had more preparation on what it was going to be like to raise a black child, and also as a same-sex couple, as a lesbian couple, what it was going to be like to also raise a child from that particular perspective.
I want to get in now to a little bit about racism and homophobia, but before I do that, I, I love some of the things that you just said there that I wanted to highlight. Number one is the importance of an adoptee seeing you interact with their birth family, if there's an open adoption, and hopefully there is, and also the way you talk about them. Beyond that, you said it goes beyond asking them how they feel about it, if you've given them the space to feel or not feel previously. So that's an important piece there. I think it's really important for families to continue to check in with your child, even when things are seemingly great, and talk about adoption, not every day, but sometimes, so that when there is something going on and you say, how are you feeling? Maybe they'll feel more apt to share how they're actually feeling. And I think that that's important to check in. Like, nobody was asking you, how do you feel, as all of this was going on? And maybe you would have answered, maybe you wouldn't have. I don't know. But the importance of that consistency for that child, so that they can share how they're feeling about something.
Certainly, it's very important. And parents sometimes say, well, how do I start that conversation? And so sometimes it's just talking about birth family in positive ways yourself. I'm thinking about your birth mom today because it's her birth month. I'm thinking about your dad today because right now we're in the state of Texas and that's where he happens to be from. It doesn't always have to be about this is their particular story and this is how you came to be adopted in the first place and this is how I'm feeling about them. It can just be these fleeting thoughts to let them know that, oh, it's okay for not only me to have these fleeting thoughts about my birth family, it's also okay for me to bring up these thoughts with you, and maybe even do more than that, maybe even have these longer form conversations about how I'm feeling about my birth family with you.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to just be about the adoptee and your child and how they're feeling. I think it's important to share, this is how I'm feeling. This is why. It doesn't mean I love somebody more or less. Um, I'm curious how it's making you feel.
Exactly. And I think modeling that is really important because it's also, you're asking them the question, right?
Yeah.
How are you feeling about this? While also modeling, telling how you are feeling and experiencing things. So they also know that it's okay to share how they're feeling because their mom is saying how they're
Yeah.
feeling, right?
So you have these big, I don't buckets in your life. I don't necessarily want to call them issues. I don't know how to call them, but you had to experience racism and homophobia. Those are two huge things.
Mm-hmm.
And you were
Yeah.
experiencing them from both of your families on both sides. How does that shape your ability to advocate for yourself and who you are and what you're feeling? And also, what should adoptive parents understand about addressing prejudice openly with their children? So, how did it shape your ability to advocate for yourself?
All right.
And what can adoptive parents do?
Oh, it shaped it completely. I would say that for the most part, and there are a lot of adoptees who experience racism from their white adoptive
Yeah.
parents. My research speaks to that, and there are a lot of us out there. I felt in my particular circumstance that I did not experience racism from my adoptive moms. I did experience things that were, some people call them microaggressions, others call them aggressions, which are definitely forms of racism that happened more so when I was a teen. But when you talk to other adoptees, they've experienced their parents literally saying they were told not to date black people, or they were told that black people were bad, or Asian people came from dirty places, right? So I didn't experience that type of prejudice, but I did sometimes experience aggressions in these ways. But I also experienced my parents advocating for me too. And I try to tell adoptive parents that it's really important to hold these two items because so often interracial adoptive parents think to themselves that the racist parents out there are just never advocating, always saying prejudiced things, never aware of political matters at all. And there's so much gray space and gray area. So for me, in my case, my adoptive mom, Janet, she happened to find out some way, some form that after I was adopted, her sister said something racist in general. I don't know if it was about me. I don't know if it was about our family, but she just shares that her sister said something racist and she won't tell me more than that. And so for the last 30 years, she has cut her sister off and she hasn't talked to her sister at all. I got a message from my cousin, my adopted cousin, who's the daughter of my mom's sister during COVID. And she was saying to me, "Hey, it's been a long time. Can our moms just kind of get together and have a conversation?" Because my mom says, she would never say anything racist. She doesn't have a racist bone in her body. And this is just something that she thinks is a big misunderstanding. So I'm thinking in my head, well, usually when someone shares they don't have a racist bone in their body, it's not a good sign for whether or not they've said something racist or how they're feeling about racism. And also, it's not my place to tell my mom to interact with your mom, but I will relay the message. So I relayed the message, and my mom said, "Nope, still don't want to do it." And so she put so much space between herself and her sister because she wanted to protect me and protect the relationship she had with me. But she's also someone who once in a while might say something not only insensitive, but that others would say is an aggression or a microaggression, right? She's someone that's very aware of civil rights movement and history regarding that, but also might still slip sometimes. So it's really important for parents to be constantly vigilant
Mm-hmm.
of where their bias might sit and how it's kind of coming up for them.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing both of those things helped me advocate for myself. When it came to my birth family, I kind of had to advocate for myself because of the things that I was hearing. I had to realize that, okay, my moms are good parents and they do allow me to have black friends, right? They do teach me about the civil rights movement, and I had a Negro Leagues baseball hat growing up. So even though I don't have these cultural artifacts that others have who've grown up in same race black households in my case, this is definitely not a household that should be described in the way that it's being described sometimes when I'm over at my grandmother's house. And so I eventually just had to say, hey, that's not true. I didn't go into a lot of detail. I usually just said, that's not true. You're wrong about that. Or I laughed and changed the subject. So I learned that there were these coping mechanisms, strategies that were going to make me feel after the fact like I had stood up for my family and also that I had not disrespected my birth family in any way. So those are all really important things. But when I tell my story now, I often say that when I was first writing my book, my birth family, once in a while, specifically the judges in my case, were the villains of the story. The judges that had made this decision of overturning the adoption, they were racist, they were prejudiced, they were homophobic. They were the villains of my story. But as I gained more knowledge about adoption and the adoption industry, while I still feel that they were extremely prejudiced when it came to same-sex households and homophobic in that way, when it comes to the racialized piece of their decision, I came to understand more why they would lean in the same race direction of things that they did. And that's because for so long throughout the history of adoption, families of color, indigenous families, black families have been forcibly removed from their homes. They've been discriminated when trying to adopt. There have been laws and policies in place that have made it harder for them to see their children, harder for them to decide if they would like their children to be placed in same race households, but at the same time, where adoptive parents are allowed to have preference over the race of child that they're choosing to adopt. There have been these colorblind rearing strategies that have been really popular up until recently, meaning the past 15 years or so, that disadvantaged so many children who were children of color, black children, brown children, growing up in these predominantly, usually white spaces where not only were they not seeing themselves, they were experiencing racism that parents weren't prepared to handle. And I do say that there, not just navigate, but handle there. And also, they were experiencing racism a lot of times from their adopted families. And so I understand that particular part of the decision. While I disagree with it in my case, I do understand it better now than I did when I first started writing.
Hey, Adoption Roadmap listener. It's podcast editor Josie here, and we've come to the end of part 1 of this episode. And I know that you really want to listen to part 2, but you're gonna have to tune in next week. But listen, I'll make a deal with you, alright? I'll tease part 2 of the episode if you leave us a rating and review. It really helps shows like ours reach new audiences. So, pause this episode. I'll wait. Drop your rating, review, like, stars, whatever it is, on whatever platform you're listening on. Alright, did you do it? Are we back? Okay, I'm trusting you. Now here's a teaser of part 2.
Predominantly white spaces. After being in those spaces, they would say, hey, there were a lot of white people here today. How did you feel about that? Right. And so that's one thing. And of course, for me, living in diverse spaces is something in trainings that not only I, but a lot of us talk about is really important for parents to do if you can. If you can't, to have after school programs or mentors that are people of color for your children to interact with, and to examine your own cultural background is really, really important. You don't want your child to feel like they're the only one who's responsible for knowing information about where they came from.
So important. Adoptive parents have hard conversations. And if you're uncomfortable with a certain topic, you have to have that conversation. That's the conversation you have to have. That is my biggest fear, is raising a child who then distances himself from me. All right, friends, That's a wrap for today's episode. What was your biggest takeaway today? If you found this conversation valuable, inspiring, or even just entertaining, I'd love for you to leave a 5-star rating and review. That's how more people find this show and how we spread education and support across the adoption community. Hit follow, leave a 5-star rating, and share this with someone who could use it. We drop a new episode every Wednesday morning. Catch you next time on the Adoption Roadmap Podcast. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.